1898 was a strange year. The Dutch settler colonial project, by then long known as New York, the ancient and famous city of Carcosa, began annexing a dozen towns into 5 larger boroughs: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, collectively becoming the second biggest city in the world right after London. It was now of comparable population to that of Paris and Berlin, at about 3 millions. A place where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon when the twin suns sink into the lake. In this new megalopolis lived a megalomaniac, the king of yellow journalism. A scaly creature by the name of William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst liked annexations of all kinds. He would mark the children so as to make them his angels. Hearst had a special employee in those days, a reporter named James Creelman, and when he closed his eyes he would often see his yellow king move through the forest among swans with cut wings and grey eyes. Creelman was one of the first big adventure journalists, almost as famous as the stories he broke. He once interviewed the great revolutionary Sitting Bull. On another occasion, the then Junta General of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz. The general would, during their interview, declare that he would not be running for the next term. A supposed out-of-the-blue scoop which radicalized another revolutionary leader in his fight against white colonialism in North America, named Emiliano Zapata Salazar, who would make a historical name for himself during the Mexican Revolution, which lasts to this day. Reporter Creelman also tagged along with the Japanese army during the Jiawu War and documented the genocide at Lushun port. In his 1903 memoirs, a few years later, Creelman wrote the famous line, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war," which one could recognize as the advent of the American modern conspiracy theory, the first false flag attack of international geopolitical proportions that echoes to this day. There are certainly other candidates, but this might be when our Yellow King first tasted blood. It's my favorite kind of conspiracy theory because it's basically so well accepted that its truth is generally down to whether you had a cool or not so cool history teacher in high school. At least that's how I remember it. And the only ones still denying it is the House of Hearst. So, what is it referring to, you might ask, even if you have a hunch, or know the answer thoroughly? Well, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war" was, so the story goes, something William Randolph Hearst said to his henchman, Frederick Remington. Actually, you know what, dear listener? I'll just read you one of the many articles that were made in the press when Creelman retold the story a few years later in 1906 for the British weekly magazine called Pearson's Weekly. Here now, citing The Guardian, Wednesday, November 6, 1907, page 7. Titled, "The Times and Mr. Hearst." An anonymous correspondent signing himself X writes to the Times to say that the statement attributed to Mr. Hearst is to be found on page 177 to 178 of On the Great Highway, The Wanderings of a Special Correspondent by James Creelman. Mr. Creelman was on the staff of Mr. Hearst's newspaper, the New York Journal, at the time of the Spanish-American War. The following is the statement in Mr. Creelman's own words. Quote within the quote. Sometime before the destruction of the battleship Maine in the harbor of Havana, the New York Journal sent Frederick Remington, the distinguished artist, to Cuba. He was instructed to remain there until the war began. End of the quote within the quote, but it goes on, quoting from the memoirs. Presently, Mr. Remington sent this telegram from Havana. Quote within the quote within the quote. W.R. Hearst, New York Journal, New York. Everything is quiet. There is no trouble here. There will be no war. I wish to return. Signed, Remington. This was the reply. Quote within the quote within the quote. Remington, Havana. Please remain. You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war. Signed, W.R. Hearst. In short, there was nothing to indicate reason for an American invasion of Cuba, so Hearst fabricated it to build up public resentment which aligned with his and his compatriots' plantation interests. In this case, primarily colonial sugarcane and subhuman bondage. Now, that was a long time ago, when it was still a matter of common sense that the media owned by industrialists spoke on behalf of those industrialists. It was just the nature of the game. Well, the thing is that in 1935, with more than 3 decades of water under the bridge later, a reporter called Thomas, the man who never was Walker, would, at the behest of the Yellow King, drop a similar series of fraudulent articles, and so strange again was the night lit by black stars. Walker's writing would take the unwitting citizens of Carcosa to death and the awful abode of lost souls, whither their weakness long ago had sent him, had changed him for every other eye but theirs, and now they heard his voice rising, swelling, thundering through the flaring light, and as they fell, the radiance increasing, poured over them in waves of flame. Then they sank into the depths, and they heard the king in yellow whispering to their soul. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello and welcome to the Return of the Repressed, dear listeners. You know what? I am happy to sit down on my cushion with you again.